Good morning, everyone, or afternoon to those who are more local to us. My name is Josephine Watson, and I'm the Commercial Project Editor at iGaming Business. We're happy to be hosting a webinar with Experian, and we'll be discussing the optimized and risk-free digital journeys. With increasing pressure on operators to sufficiently verify players and the need to minimize risk, this webinar will discuss what effective digital onboarding looks like from a consumer and architecture viewpoint, what the value exchange needs to be in order to provoke data sharing and retain custom, and how new data, analytics, and technology help relieve friction and act in the moments that matter. There will be a Q&A section following the presentation, so please do submit questions as we go along. We'll try to address as many of these as possible in the allocated time. Our speaker for today's live session will be Micah Wilbrand, Managing Director of Identity, Fraud and Payments at Experian UK and Ireland. Micah is Experienced Managing Director and P&L owner with global commercial, consultative, operational and strategic experience. He's worked in multiple types of businesses in both the US and Europe, ranging from startups to Fortune 500 organizations. Additionally, he consults and speaks extensively on emerging payments, currencies and financial instruments. With that out of the way, I'll hand over to Micah.
Cheers. Thank you very much. And thanks for everyone that's on the call today. So what we'll do for the next sort of 30 to 35 minutes is kind of cover off what we are seeing in the market and some of the challenges that are facing operators in the online gaming market, specifically how Experian can begin to address that. So as you can see, we'll look at the challenge, what the solution looks like, how does it work, and kind of what the benefits are, and then as mentioned, have some time for Q&A at the end. So if we kind of go to the challenge, what we're looking at is really, what consumers are expecting, for them to protect you, because they all want this to be a seamless journey. So Experian has done something what we call just the Global Fraud Report. We do this every year. We publish it, and it has come out already for this year. In that Global Fraud Report, we interview over 10,000 people globally and do around 50 executive interviews just around the state of the market around identity verification and fraud prevention around the world. And what we're going to be sharing a little bit with you is just some of the information that we get from this report to kind of show you what is happening in the market, how things are evolving, and what's going on. So as you can kind of see from the first stat that we have on the screen, 94% of consumers believe that they are secure online. Now, obviously, out in the market, there is a lot of information just around, data breaches or whatnot and security, and it's been a heightened thing. But what we are seeing is that consumers generally feel that when they interact with operators, they do feel that they have a secure experience. There's a lot more awareness around the use of HTTPS and being the data security that's come on. So we are starting to see that element come through. However, when we look at the business side of things, 81% of businesses, whoops, went a little bit too far. It's okay. 81% of businesses have experienced the same or more fraud losses in the last 12 months. So you can kind of see, almost nearly all consumers are feeling that they feel very secure in working with operators and working with online merchants. But merchants, nearly 4/5 of them haven't been able to lower their fraud over the preceding 12 months. So while there's a lot of effort going into ensuring that consumers are protected, that you're still seeing significant losses on your side to try and improve that. And we're still seeing a growing number of merchants, having more concern around their fraud losses. And as you can see, because still that the fraud is rising within there. So this is kind of the dynamic that we're dealing with. You're dealing with a dynamic where consumers generally are feeling quite secure about, working with merchants, but on your side, your merchants and businesses are not feeling very comfortable with the customers they're onboarding. They're feeling a lot of stress, and you're seeing a lot of fraud still come through, even though consumers are doing quite well. So when we look at that, and that challenge and what the friction is, so we have that. And so what merchants and operators are doing is they are trying to make, the customer journey as smooth as possible. And this is why we are seeing, some fraud losses increase. And so what we have seen was a real push to make the total frictionless journey, to onboard people as quickly and easy as possible. But at some point, having some friction is important, and that's the other thing that merchants are playing around with. And so what we're seeing is a dropout rate on applications around 35%. So this is a statistic that probably makes any marketing person and customer onboarding shiver in fear, because it's quite a high rate. But when you are looking at an online fraud dynamic and you're looking at onboarding and customer risk, that is an element that you need to balance. And so what often is happening is, as you're introducing maybe a little bit more friction to try and weed out some of the bad actors, you're starting to see consumers start to drop out of that process. And so that kind of leads into the next stat, where 42% of millennials say they'd be more willing to transact if there weren't so many security hurdles to overcome. And this is what you're trying to manage. You're trying to manage a lower dropout rate, an abandonment rate, but also not having so many security hurdles. So what has been occurring with a lot of onboarding is you do have a lot of elements that are going on up front that really prevent and make customers feel very awkward with the process. They feel like there is friction and there's a lot of things that they have to do, and it makes them uncomfortable, and they're just simply abandoning the process. And then finally on that stat, that 70% of businesses currently struggle to authenticate their customers without impacting the customer experience. So obviously the holy grail is to authenticate customers at 100% and have the best customer experience possible. And that's really the balance that we're really trying to really solve and really address with you today. And that's the biggest thing that we're going to be speaking to. So, off the back of that, you're probably asking, how do I know that an individual exists and they are who they say they are? Now, this has been, since the internet has been invented, this has been the number one question that businesses have, is how do I know when someone's not sitting in front of me, how do I know they are who they say they are? The second thing that we'll be asking is, how confident are they that the personal data that they have is accurate? So going back to simple data quality, one of the biggest problems that merchants have and operators have is the data that they collect is often quite corrupt. You may not have the best data from an address perspective. You may be getting date of birth formatted incorrectly. You may be getting forename and surname acquired in different ways too. So ensuring that you have a really good system to ensure that you get the best data possible for that. The third thing is, do I spend more money than I need to on manual identity verification and resolving payment accounts? So this is when people are dropping into referral queues and going into investigatory areas around there, because if you can't figure out who they say they are, you may have some bad data. They then get into the manual review, which often has quite a high dropout rate. So when we talked about 35% of the dropout rate, probably the vast majority of that 35% is because they went into the referral queue. And most consumers, once they do that, they're gone. They don't want to do that. So, you really want to balance that. And so finally, the fourth thing that you are balancing on top of that is, are you protecting, financially vulnerable people from gambling as well? So obviously within the gaming sector, specifically in the UK, there's been a big push and a big emphasis around affordability and ensuring that the customer base that you have are good customers, that not being predatory or really taking on individuals that can't afford to utilize the services. So when you combine on that, it's quite a big ask. There's lots of things that are going on to make sure that you're balancing, all the various aspects that you have. And it's a big push-pull from people wanting to get most customers in on the business side, to fraud and risk, wanting to put up barriers to ensure that you get the best customers possible. And then you have sort of compliance and legal, which are wanting to push more that you are getting that best good quality customer. So you sort of have this triangle pushing you in terms of what you're going to do. So when we go on to the next slide, and as we progress here, we'll really be talking about how you can manage those three different aspects. And so really with that challenge, spotting fraud becomes easier when you're more certain about a customer's identity. Now that's pretty straightforward. I don't think anyone would ever argue that the more I know about someone, that the less likely that they are going to commit fraud against me. And so really that's the key. And to the past 20 years or so that this market has been going and whatnot, we've really been working on trying to solve this problem. Sort of the first iterations were simply just by utilizing credit cards and just using that method. The second was utilizing more, government issued databases. and whatnot. So really is how do we become more certain about who that individual is and they really are who they say they are. And obviously, the vast majority of businesses would say that, the risk mitigation for fraud is reduced if they could identify customers better. It's pretty straightforward. Any business, online or offline, are going to say that because they do want to know who their customers are. So if we go to the next one, going into more on the business side, this is even saying from a vendor perspective. When you're talking about your customers, it's obvious. I want to know who they say they are. But even from a business perspective, and you're talking about your vendor and your supply chain, which has another area of emphasis, nearly 85% of customers say they'll use more of their vendors if they can better identify customers. So you're seeing this throughout the company that there needs to be better processes out there to really ensure that you're capturing and identifying your customers and who you work with out there. And finally, that last stat, just that 53% of businesses only have a medium certainty. So we kind of talked about it earlier. You want to ensure that you have a good customer base. You want to have that, but obviously the challenge is most companies are still struggling to actually identify their customer base and really know who they say they are. And that's one of the things that at Experian we've really been trying to address and really go forward with. So, with, our onboarding services and identity, basically what Experian is going to be able to do is enable you to get a trusted relationship with your legitimate customers from day one. Now, this has always been, kind of our goal that we wanted to have, but, just recently with a lot of advent and technology and a lot of push with the new backend systems and platforms that are out there, is now we can really, truly start to enact on this and really give operators and merchants a really good process to get better customers onboarded in a much swifter process in a much easier way. And that's what we're going to spend, the next, sort of 15 minutes talking about is how do you actually accomplish that? How does that work in real life? And what does it take to go ahead and do that? So, how does that work, just at a high level? So when we talk about, you need to offer a way to maximize your customer acquisition as well as manage your fraud, what a consumer onboarding solution should have, sort of these 5 different variables that are in there. The first one, we talked about data quality. We talked that, nearly, 85% of customers, or businesses aren't collecting information in an accurate way. And so really the really important thing is, using, data management and data processes to ensure that you capture data in a very effective way is really, really important. Traditionally, the use of address validation and address verification and even telephone number and email has largely been done for marketing purposes or maybe for other reasons. But what we've seen with our customers as well is that when you're collecting high quality data and you're capturing it, it actually makes the identification of customers easier. Rooting out those influences and the influxes of various ways people do addressing and date of birth and whatnot really can help improve match rates and really ensure that you have the best customer possible. So it's really critical to really eliminate the garbage in type, garbage out type problem that we see in terms of customer onboarding and getting the best customers possible. The second thing is really, verifying the bank account information. We'll talk a little bit about this later, but within the UK, we are very fortunate to have the ability to tie individuals' names to a bank account. I will say, we'll talk about this later, the ownership of a bank account is the number one feature in any part of fraud identification that we have at Experian. It gives you the highest indication if someone is a legitimate customer or not. So you can wipe out a significant amount of your fraud if you actually are tying an individual to a bank account. And so if you aren't doing that today, and if you don't take anything else away from this webinar, really ensuring that you have that information can be key. Now, if you live outside the UK, there are some things you can do to do that as well. Some countries, Germany has the ability, and some other countries do as well. So, if you do have access to that type of data or service, I can't recommend enough that you go ahead and do that, because it's going to really significantly improve your onboarding process. The third thing is, verifying the customers that they are who they say they are with the details linked to them. So we talked about the 2 previous things. So really getting high quality address and email information and ensuring that that's accurate, tying someone to a bank account, and then sort of bringing those 3 together. It's, tying an individual at an address to their bank account. And there, we talked about with bank account information being a big indication of fraud. When you bring that through and then tie them to an address, you tie them to a date of birth, and you bring all that together, you have a really, really complete and accurate view of who the customer is, and how legitimate they are and how good of a quality they are. So, those three things are just critical as part of your onboarding process, and really have a limited amount of friction to a consumer. So they're really good ways to bring this through. The fourth thing, is setting up good risk layers, for your approve, refer, decline requests. So ensuring that you tune your match rates. Regulators have been very hard on this lately. You've seen a lot of this in the banking sector, and we're going to start to see this because of the Fifth Anti-Money Laundering Directive within the UK and other regulations that are very similar around the world. Before, most organizations would set a risk profile, risk threshold, and basically just leave it and not really tune it again. Regulators are being very adamant that you continue to tune and really look at your approve, referral, and denial thresholds to ensure that you are capturing and reflecting the emerging trends for fraud and other financial crime like money laundering. So you need to make sure you keep that up to date and manage it. And also it's important because, for a certain perspective, you need to manage it so you're not getting too many referrals coming through to a help desk, which you may not have staffed adequately enough. So it is an important thing to really balance and really continually monitor what that's going to look like within the system. And then the last thing is, assessing, someone's affordability and ensuring that you're doing your due diligence. So, we talked about, a real push, especially within the UK, to protect vulnerable individuals from problem gambling. This is with the advent of open banking and the inclusion of being able to access, some more transactional information and financial information on people. It's really bringing that out and really ensuring that you are protecting the individuals as they come on board. So when you sort of bring all of this together, you're creating a high quality experience in terms of the onboarding. You have a very solid perspective on what you want to do for their accept and refers and ensuring that you manage that. And then finally, and once you get them through, is really assessing, are they actually able, they actually have money to gamble and wager with you. So it is important to really go through that and ensure that, that process is tuned over time. So when we kind of, look at what that happy path is, what does frictionless fraud look like? We'll kind of go through a journey here on what that is. So, what we did is kind of, laid out a little map here on what it's done. And one of the things that we've done at Experian is traditionally, we've always kind of viewed our services to be more laptop and PC oriented. I think one of the big changes, and you'll kind of see here, is that, like us, we, have a digital strategy. There's often a saying, no longer can you have a digital strategy, and your strategy is digital. And, that's what we're going with, and really going for how can you onboard your customers in a mobile environment first, because that's where most customer acquisition is happening these days. And what does that look like, as things come through? So, the individual is coming in, they're entering their application data on the mobile phone. And then basically we're taking that and we're matching those details against, data that Experian holds. We're validating that it's correct. We're verifying that they exist either within the credit bureau or on the electoral roll, and really verifying the details against them are accurate and valid. And so then the next thing we're doing once they pass that is, we're assessing the affordability that they have. So utilizing, analytics that we have within our side or also within the open banking systems. You can really start to get a good view that, you've onboarded, you have a good idea who the consumer is, but now you can see that they are able and a good customer and a profitable customer that you can do that. Then the next stage, as we kind of talked about, is really, based on your risk profile and your risk assessment, is really deciding, do you want this customer onboarded? Do you want to refer them into a queue, or do you just want to decline them straight out for whatever reason? And so, you're able to do this, and, we're kind of going through this in sort of a step-by-step process. But in reality, this is, a situation that should take, once the customer submitted their information, this whole thing should be done in less than a second. So, you have a very, kind of low friction type of experience. And so finally, at the very end, the customer is able to open that account and start to gamble with you immediately. we've seen a lot of push with the regulators, especially around the changing of the age verification regulations, having to do those age checks at the point of acquisition now, and at the beginning, not allowing 72 hours, or at the point of withdrawal of money. So now it is more important than ever that you have a good solid process up front to really onboard these customers and get them through on that frictionless path as quickly as possible. So when we talked about risk-based authentication and how can you deliver a positive customer experience while reducing fraud, we kind of went through that path and what you need to do. So you really haven't changed what's occurring. You're still collecting a lot of information. You're still getting what's coming through, and largely what we talked about, you're doing this probably still in a more traditional sense. But what we've done to really create a very positive customer experience is we've tried to almost gamify what this is going to look like. And so, up here, what we have are just some basic details of what things can do. So we talked about getting an email address, getting a telephone number, and now you're able to get a photo of a driver's license and a selfie. So from that perspective, you're able to really simply and easily gather a customer's information just by a few simple things. One of the biggest problems with onboarding customers in the mobile channel is the number of keys that people have to put in all of their information that comes through. But by simply taking a photo of their driver's license, being able to automatically pull that information off their driver's license or a passport, and then comparing a selfie, you're able to gather a lot of that information right away and compare that data. And then all you're asking the customer to do is then enter in a phone number and their email address right away. And often that's stored in mobile browsers today. So you're not asking your customer to actually enter in a lot of information. The customer experience is very positive. Millennials and even Gen Z now that are able to be in this market, this is their experience. These are the customers that merchants and operators want, and it gets a really good experience for them right away. So then what happens is, that data, after they take the photo of their identification card and the selfie and the telephone number and email, that's now dropped into the platform. We do, within, a second, we'll perform those checks. And then from there, you're going to be, onboarded, or you refer them, or are they going to be denied? So, the previous slide, we really talked about more kind of a traditional way that you're doing it. You're asking for the name and address, you're having them type that in, and data quality checks and whatnot. But here, what we're doing is, talking about what that next generation of customer onboarding does look like. How are you making it, the best positive experience for consumers, and really, creating a real positive buzz for your brand that's out there. There was a UK bank that just debuted this type of solution last week, and it's gotten just a lot of brand recognition, a positive PR by the ability to do this. So it is a great way to really have a positive brand experience tied to you, and really create a lot of buzz by saying you can open up an account with just a selfie. People love that kind of tagline, and it really starts to really bring forward what's going through. So, we talked quite a bit, a lot about what the experience looks like, what are they doing, how are they coming through. And so, really just to try and encapsulate, what are the benefits. We talked a lot about this going through, and there's really, three strong benefits that come out of this type of process. Obviously the first one is you're going to help reduce your fraud risk. Really the kind of the real method by doing the document verification and the selfie. The greatest thing is that's really reducing your fraud risk tremendously. It's sort of a hidden way to make it fun for your consumer, but by being able to do some basic facial recognition by comparing the photo and the selfie to a national identification card, you're getting a very strong link between the individual that they are real in their document, as well as ensuring that the document they're providing you is real. The further thing is, because you're able to pull information straight off a national identity document, you're almost guaranteed that you're going to have the best data quality coming through, because the data often held in databases such as Experian are from government types of databases or other official documentation, which are going to match up. So just by having that ability to have super clean, super easy ways to bring it in, you're almost automatically going to reduce your fraud risk straight away, because you're just getting much better data. The second is you're getting stronger payment verification. So with the advent of open banking, and like I said, with the ability to link people to bank account, not only are they, you're reducing the fraud by their identity, but you're also proving that, they have access to a bank account, they own a bank account, and they have the ability to pay. And so that gives you a much better risk-based decision on how, what types of games, what types of services are you going to be offering them, and how that's going to be brought about. And then finally, that third is, from an affordability perspective, again, you really are getting a great view into what is going to happen with that individual. Maybe are you underselling them? If someone has a wider affordability profile than what they may have initially indicated, it can allow you some opportunities to upsell them on different services or different types of or games or plays that you want to do. But if someone is starting to look more at risk, you can start to pull back and really lower your exposure. So, when, vulnerable customers and customers that can't afford to pay, aren't very good customers, they often default, and they often have quite a few fraud losses. So, it's really important to kind of keep up to date and ensure that you have, the best informed decision with that. And then, you're really talking about on that last slide, the benefits from a customer's perspective in terms of, fraud and vulnerability. But, also what are the benefits from, sort of an IT and technical side of things? Again, one of the hardest things that any type of organization has is how do you change, how do you evolve with time, how do you bring in these new processes without a big IT change program or some sort of transformation project to bring it in. Upsetting existing onboarding processes and monitoring processes can be very, very difficult and a hard sell. So one of the things you want to do when you are reviewing this, and we are seeing, because of the age verification regulations going on within the UK, we are seeing a tremendous increase of people really evaluating what their onboarding processes look like. So now is the perfect time to really start to evaluate it. And so what we're looking at is really that ability to have that single platform that can help you deliver all of this. And so that's what that benefit gives you with that single platform accessing all these products and services. So, from a speed of implementation, having, a single API into one platform that then can access that verification data, the bank account data, open banking, fraud analytics, machine learning, all those other things. Having access to that, it makes it very easy for a customer, because what we can do at Experian and what other individuals can do is you can have a single API link into that platform. And then we can continue to add products and services and microservices in the back end that you can then consume over time. So you're not having to continually implement and consume IT resources on your side. We'll take care of that for you. So it gives you that ability to evolve and flex over time as things change from regulatory or even market forces coming through. And then again, from a rapid data delivery perspective, because you have that single platform in place, you can retrieve the data, you can make decisions a lot more quicker. And also we talked about one of the changes that now enable us to do these things is really the advent of big data and machine learning frameworks. Big data has supplemented, and the buzz around big data has kind of died down. But the great thing about big data, obviously, is it creates a pool of very cheap storage to bring all your data into one place. But the problem most organizations were struggling with is you just created another problem. Instead of having siloed databases, you now have a big thing of data, a big blob of data that you really can't get any information out of, because it takes a lot of time to crawl through and really get insights. But that's what machine learning frameworks will do. The analytics behind machine learning and the way things happen is it can really pull out that intelligence and insight very quickly. So with both the rapid deployment of machine learning frameworks and the utilization of big data, you can really start to drag out and pull out insights into that data that you have from both an identity perspective, a fraud perspective, payments, and vulnerability. Is you do have that ability to really look into the data. And finally, the last thing is reducing your time and friction to onboard. We talked about it on the last slide, just having that ability, that great customer experience around taking a picture, taking a selfie, and a picture of your document. You can onboard an individual with quite a minimum of keystrokes, almost probably less than 5, in a very simple thing. So you really can increase the customer journey and really increase the satisfaction with the customer journey and have a very minimal friction that's going on. And that's what customers want. That's what they're looking for, and how they're going about it. So then finally, just why Experian? We'll kind of the next few slides, we'll kind of go through the why Experian, and then after we go through these, we'll go into the Q&A section. So if anyone has any questions, you can feed them through into the sidebar. We've had a few flow through already that we'll tackle. So if anyone else still has questions, please feel free to do that. But so from a why Experian perspective, so we talked about what I've been speaking about the last sort of 8 or 9 slides is really why there needs to be change, what individuals are doing, and what's the need for this. We kind of talked about then how are organizations addressing it, how are they doing it from a customer perspective, and why is that important. So from an Experian perspective, obviously we have a point of view on this. We have a perspective on why we organizations should work with Experian as they go through. From an innovation perspective, surprisingly, I know a lot of people are surprised to hear this, but Forbes, for the 5th year in a row, has named us one of the world's most innovative companies. Experian, I've been working at Experian for a year, and trust me, before I came, I wouldn't have said Experian is one of the most innovative places. But actually, when you come in and you do really get inside, the rate of change going on just to address this is been great. And we are doing lots of things. I come from a very small RegTech, FinTech type of world, and being able to really move at speed at the scale that we have is amazing and can really do that. The second thing is one of the other biggest aspects that you have is just from a machine learning perspective. One of the wonderful things about the amount of data that we have at Experian is we also have some of the best data scientists in the world working for us. And so what that can do is we're not producing just machine learning frameworks in isolation and hoping that the data works and hoping that the frameworks work. We actually have the data to prove out our frameworks before we bring them out to market or before we even talk to customers about it. So, really we have a great amount of information and a lot of insights into what we can do to improve processes and bring it out. Obviously, we have lots of patents, and we invest quite a bit into social change and network. In APAC, we do a lot of investment for underbaked and unbaked individuals, and so really trying to bring that out. So, from a technology perspective, innovation, we're doing a lot of things to do that. From a speed perspective, one of the biggest changes we have, and this has really occurred the past 18 months, is really I talked about in the last slide, having access to all of this amazing data, as well as lots of data scientists. Now, traditionally, the way we've done this before is through scorecards, which are a little bit bulky and can be a little bit manual. But with the implementation of machine learning intrinsic to all of our products, we can now change these quite a bit very rapidly and really model on the fly for customers. And this has been a really big thing for us and trying to bring it out. And we've seen significant increases in a lot of our fraud identification rates. We've seen customers see an instant 20 to 30% lift in fraud identification just by implementing our new machine learning analytics. So we are starting to see a big increase in that. And from an identification perspective, we are seeing that trend too. We're able to identify better customers because we are able to bring in open banking, but also with the machine learning frameworks on top. So we have all of that come through and really bring out to market very quickly. Finally, and then from a third perspective, just to scale, Experian is one of the largest companies in the world, especially in the credit market. We are the largest credit bureau, but we do work with over 12,000 customers. Within the UK, we have over 5,000 customers, which is a lot. So we work with the largest brands in the world. We work with the largest banks in the world. We work with the largest gaming organizations in the world. So we have unparalleled scale that allows us to really lift and bring in other technologies from around the world. We work very closely with our technology people in Brazil, in APAC, in the US, to really bring in their experiences as well. I often say that the West largely has been very static now in terms of what's happening in customer onboarding and working with customers. We're seeing much more innovative technology coming out of Asia and coming out of Africa. And with the organizations and the companies that we work with, we are starting to see that flow back come through. We're getting a lot more technology. We're getting a lot more services coming, from our Hong Kong office, from Singapore, and from South Africa. So, we are coming through and really starting to bring that out to enable you all to not only just have the scale that we have here in the UK, but also to expand it globally as you expand your markets to make it more regionally appropriate for where you're going into market. So, as I said, from that perspective, from scale, from innovation and whatnot, Experian has been there. We're going to continue to keep going forward and really pressing on what we have. So I think with that, we've reached the end of the presentation. I think at this point we can move to the questions and answers, so I'll hand it back over.
Awesome, yeah, and I wanted to thank you first for a great presentation. We have some really great insights in there. We've got a couple of questions, as Micah said, come through already, but we've still got plenty of time to run through any others our audience has today, so do continue to submit them. So first things first, I just wanted to quickly clarify on this, a question that came through right at the very beginning about some of those stats that we had in the earlier slides.
Yep.
Were those numbers contextually relevant to gambling, or is that globally fraud related?
Yeah, so obviously the title is the Global Fraud Report, and it is, as we did interview, this goes across all verticals. So this statistics I was giving was across all verticals. However, within the Global Fraud Report, we do have the ability to break it down by vertical. So within that data, there is specific vertical information that is there. But yes, within this specific presentation, we're just broadly speaking to market around fraud and what's going on.
Brilliant, thanks for clarifying. So first things first then, in terms of sort of broader questions, are you seeing a lot of impact with new age verification regulations?
Yeah, so as I referenced earlier, one of the biggest changes with the new age verification regulations coming in, with the change from 72 hours to doing age verification at the point of acquisition, we are seeing a complete, almost overhaul of how gaming operators are onboarding customers because of the requirements. So, usually when these regulations come on, there's maybe a little tweak of a system or something else. Now, because of this change and the way the processes have to change, you are seeing organizations really evaluate how they onboard and ensure that they are meeting their regulatory requirements, but also can they do it in a better and safer way? Because, like most organizations, touching that customer onboarding process is very difficult. You don't want to screw up. It's very optimized to onboard as many customers as possible. But now with this regulatory requirement, they do need to be more careful. So you are starting to see that ability and a move internally, especially at the highest levels, to ensure that they are protecting themselves. So now is a good time, if you do want to improve it, to really capture on that and really push through a business case.
Yeah, we had a lot of discussions about the regulation before it passed earlier this year, and there was a lot of questions around whether or not people were ready for it at the time. Do you think people have adapted to it in sort of good time, or is there still a sort of learning process that needs to be experienced in terms of handling that change?
Yeah, I mean, I think you do see, like with implementation of new regulations in any industry, you do see differing levels, and usually when new regulations come into pass, the largest vendors usually are prepared, and then as you start to go down, and the smaller vendors are less prepared, and there's not much difference. So the larger companies have systems in place to adapt to this. Now, do they still need to go? Probably they still have some place to go, but they already have some things. They have been planning for it. They obviously have resources to kind of make this happen. As it goes down to smaller operators, yes, there's a lot of catching up to do. And I think usually with these regulations, there is about a 6-month grace period that regulators give you. So with this, I'm not saying regulators will, but usually they do. So I think we are now starting to see, oh, this actually did come into place. Now I've got to do something. So there are definitely people playing catch up, but surprisingly, I think the industry was a little bit more prepared for it than we were expecting initially.
Yeah, I think that's definitely the feedback we're getting as well. What would be your sort of advice for those small guys who don't have the sort of resource preparedness?
Yep.
Do you think it's just a question of get up to speed as quick as you can, or are there certain tactics they can sort of put into place to ensure they can do that catching up, if you will?
Yeah, I mean, I think largely the way they're handling it is just through manual reviews and doing that, which isn't. We talked about customer experience. That's not the greatest way to do it, but that's how we're going. I think for smaller operators, usually for them to have new systems, often they view that as quite expensive to make that change. I will say, because of various other changes specifically related to anti-money laundering regulations for all industries, there are a lot of fintech and regtech companies are out there, not just Experian, but there are lots of other ones that are out there that are doing this this type of activity for significantly cheaper than probably you looked at in the market 2 or 3 years ago. So it shouldn't be, there shouldn't be sticker shock when you go out there, and you should be able to actually have some of this in a fairly cost-effective manner. And if you are getting sticker shock, then keep looking around, because there are vendors out there that can give you a compliance solution that's really cost-effective.
And it's also probably almost definitely more cost-effective than getting fined.
It always is. The joke is always, it's always cheaper than see what the fines are going to be. But yeah, having that come out, and obviously there's some accounting treatments you can do through CapEx to make it more palatable to go through. But yeah.
Brilliant, thank you.
Yep.
So obviously you spoke a bit about machine learning in your presentation. What sort of traction is that getting at the moment from your experience?
So especially in a fraud market, so we'll talk about fraud market in general. Fraud in general just obviously has a big uptake in machine learning, largely because you don't have regulations around it. So if you're applying, because you have two types of machine learning, you have supervised and unsupervised machine learning. Unsupervised, basically no one can tell you why something was identified, because the machine is doing it all. There's not a lot of human intelligence behind it, whereas supervised it does. And so when you're talking about in a regulated environment, supervised has been starting to be taken up, and regulators aren't known to be the most technically advanced people in the world. So they are starting to get more comfortable with supervised machine learning, and because that has started to come into play, we are starting to see just a massive uptake. As I mentioned, we moving from our traditional scorecard approach, which is mostly just a rules-based kind of thing, to machine learning. We've seen an instant uplift of 20 to 30%, just switching to that framework. And that's the type of uplift you can get right away from the machine learning frameworks. And that's just from the first one. Once, the real power of machine learning is, as it says, as the machine learns. So you get that instant uplift, but 6 months down the road, as fraudsters start to discover how you are identifying them, they'll change their tactics, but that's what the machine learning does, is it changes with them. So you'll start to see the continual identification of it and the benefits over the long term. So it is, one of the biggest things. Everyone, obviously, any webinar, anyone, anywhere talks about machine learning at some point, and it's a good reason. Like it just provides so much value.
Absolutely. And obviously, you said that there's sort of 6 months down the line or even further forward, it'll start to really show itself. Do you think there's like a next phase in machine learning, like the next capability as the technology continues to develop, or is it very much a case of getting to grips with what it can do now?
Yeah, so I think it is getting to grips with what it can do now. I do think the next phase, we talked about supervised and unsupervised. So I think the phase we're going through now is, regulators are now getting comfortable with supervised, but largely with supervised, rules cannot be used unless a human approves it. So the machine isn't just going off doing something. So they're famous cases when Microsoft released its first chatbot. They turned it into a racist, misogynistic chat person in 30 minutes because people were just pinging it and it was learning unsupervised. And that's what regulators are really worried about, because they don't want these rules to be running amok without any sort of guidance. So I think what we're going to see is the next phase is as supervised, as you identify 80% of fraud, but then you start to tap out at 85, you're going to see that next push. All right, how do I get to 95? And we'll probably see something in between the supervised and unsupervised that people will start to get, because there is still a lot of way to go. But I think you're right. It's going to be that push. You probably still have another 2 to 3 years before that'll really start to be, important.
Yeah, as I say, it hasn't had the best PR so far.
No.
But there's a lot of hope in that technology and what can be done with it. So a question sort of on how we can sort of implement your solutions. Mm-hmm. How quickly can everything sort of be put together from your side?
Yep. So as we talked about the benefits of a platform and what can go on. So largely in terms of getting the platform installed, it only takes roughly 2 to 3 weeks to get the platform installed, and then depending on the services that you have behind it, probably take another few weeks. So from the point that you decide you want to go, you can have a live system in about 6 weeks. If everything is lined up, if you have resources available to implement and do everything. So it can be done quite rapidly. So as you talked about earlier, some of the small people that are behind, if you do have a little bit of a grace period with the regulators and you have a plan, you can have something up, quite rapidly within a quarter to kind of start getting that going. So it is a really quick process and really can be done, very, very swiftly.
Awesome. And then is the solution global at the moment? Or?
Yeah, so I think one of the important things that we don't mention a lot is while the UK regulations, technically are just for the UK, these regulations are not, regulators are doing a much better job speaking together. So, on our end, we've done a lot to ensure we make it a global solution. So our services, which are more back-end and digital, like identification, so email addresses are global, identifying devices, that's a global thing. But we're also bringing in data sources from around the world so you can access government-issued data in 50 countries and do that. So you can really start to expand it and meet those regulations that will be coming up, be it in Germany or Italy or if the US ever decides to. So, you really have that ability to ensure that you can tackle all markets in a very standard manner. So you're not having, different customer experiences based on the geography you're in and really give a simple experience to everyone.
Brilliant. And obviously, apologies, it's quite difficult at the moment to sort of see where the regulatory landscape is going. But as you say, regulators are communicating quite effectively.
Yes.
And what do you think can be done in terms of facilitating these regulations in the future between operators and other operators and regulators?
Yeah, I think the one thing that has been learned with regulation over time, and you have seen this in banking, is basically in the 2000s, you had regulators just pressing things down and the banks saying, no, we're not going to do it. Eventually, they bent to the regulators' will, and now they're working quite closely. And so now the banking community is now going to regulators and saying, this is feasible and this is not, and regulators are taking that on board. So as regulators come in and say something crazy that they want to be done, the banks can now say, listen, we've done all of this, this can't be done at this time, and they're having a partnership with them now, which they didn't have 10 years ago. I think gaming has sort of been on that same journey. It's been very hands-off. It's been very, well, most operators would probably disagree with me. It has been fairly unregulated and a fairly light touch perspective compared to other markets. So, but I think what we're seeing now is we are starting to see that journey that the banks went through a decade ago. I think we are seeing more closer interaction as the businesses mature, publicly traded, they have responsibilities that are out there. And it's a proven market, and governments really do like it. It's a good revenue resource for them, and they do appreciate it. So I think we are seeing the maturity in the UK market that comes through where you are, while it feels very heavy-handed, they are starting to take opinions back from the operators and really start to work with them. And that's the point you want to get to, because regulators can be a real pain if you don't work with them, and that's what they want.
Yeah, fair enough. So going back to the machine learning point, we've had another question come through on that. What risks do you see in the future of machine learning? And I think we sort of briefly touched on this towards the end of the discussion we had on it, but what do you think will be the next big thing? Unsupervised smart machine learning or something else? Is it going to move away from that technology?
Yeah, so I think we talked a little bit about unsupervised and what's happening. I think specifically within gaming, the biggest risk that we have with machine learning, both supervised and unsupervised, really is the misidentification of individuals. So from a regulatory point of view, if you're talking about a sanctioned individual or a politically exposed person individual that you need to identify, there are some risks that machine learning will misidentify them, that if you're not careful with how the models go through. And that's why regulators are while they're embracing it, because it does have significant value, that it can go. So I think that's in the short term, that's what needs to be done, is just people keeping an eye on it. From fraud, I think there's a pretty strong use case. So even if things go wrong, fraud is bad right now, so really the only way it can go is up. So really on the identity side, that's one place where you could see some impact. If people do come through, if fraudsters do start to flood models with slightly different information to try and train it to what they're doing, you would see that manipulation. So I think that it's one of the things in the beginning people have to watch out for. But over time, people talk about AI and whatnot. AI is a long time away. So it's just the next buzzword because people don't want to say machine learning. So proper AI is really far. So I think the next big thing in this market is going to be unsupervised. But like we said, we need to work through and get the comfort level that everyone is, and that's going to take 2 to 3 years, and then we'll start to tackle the unsupervised bits. But hopefully this gets quicker because there is value that goes through it.
Absolutely. I think it's interesting, actually. It's nice to hear someone else say the distinction between artificial intelligence and machine learning, because there is one there. I guess a good way to sort of wrap off a couple bits that we can cover still, but I think a nice thing to sort of summarize the session today would be to have a look at sort of what do you think are sort of the big 3 things that people can take away from today's session, that people can sort of implement in the next month as we come up to the end of that 6-month quote-unquote grace period, not guaranteed.
So I think the main thing is, the biggest takeaway, number one, is, if you don't have something in place, if you're a UK regulated operator, you don't have something in place, start looking now. You still have time to get something done and really make it. If you are already in the process, then obviously keep going, because that's, you have to do it. And it's good for everyone. So I think the second is to that, because like we said, often operators, you do want to change something, but because that customer acquisition is so tightly controlled in all organizations, you do have a window now to make a significant change, get some money to come in and make, some CapEx to come in and make significant changes. And if you do, really, there should be a refresh to go to a platform, because, predominantly the way operators have been solving this is by implementing point solutions and then knitting them together on their side. But it takes a lot to operate that. It takes a lot of IT resources on their side. So if you push that onto the technology providers, they just give you single access to a platform that significantly lowers your IT costs and maintenance over time. You push that off to the technology provider. So that's the other thing that you can do, or that operators can, or technology providers can do as a takeaway. And then the third, really, if you kind of just something very specific is, I talked about, if you are in the UK, get a way to verify bank ownership. I promise you, it is, from the models we've seen, the data we've seen, all the proof of concepts we've done, there is not a bigger indicator of identity or fraud risk than that they own a bank account. They're not guaranteed to be a good customer, but the profile of that person is significantly different. So if I would do one thing, that would be the one thing I would do. If you don't do a platform, if you don't, obviously get the age verification in, but that'd be one other thing, is just make sure that you have that.
Brilliant. That's probably all we've got time for today, but if you do have further questions, please do feel free to contact us with them and we will share them across with Micah. Thank you very much for joining us today at Clarion Gaming HQ. It's been nice to have you in the offices. Today's webinar has been recorded and will be available to listen to on demand shortly for you to rewatch and share with your colleagues. Otherwise, we will see you soon.